This is section 4.5, and in 4.5 here, we're going to be talking about solving quadratic equations by square roots. So, again, we're looking at solving by square root. Now, are you going to be able to determine that you're going to be able to use a square root, or do I use factoring, things like that? Let's talk about that. It says here, you can solve any equation that contains a perfect square by finding the square roots. The simplest form of the type of equation is ax squared equals c, which means, you guys notice there's no b term, because if you remember, ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0 is our regular form. And now notice there's no b term, so there's no x value. Okay? Anytime there's no x value, we can solve an equation using square roots. So here's kind of the steps that we are going to look at using to solve by square roots. So first, you got to recognize that there's no b term, there's no middle term, okay, of the trinomial. If there's no middle term, then you can just get x by itself. That's what we're going to do. When this happens, you want to solve for x squared, or in other words, get x squared by itself on one side of the equation, everything else on the other side. Okay, before we were always getting everything equal to 0. Now we want to change that up. If there's no middle term, we're going to get it to where we get x squared on one side, everything else on the other. Then we're going to take the square root of both sides of the equation. Okay, square root. Now, you must simplify your radicals so that no perfect squares are left underneath the root. We're simply, in this case right now, we're going to just go ahead and make these answers as decimals. Again, reminder, when you take the square root of an answer, now when you take the square root of both sides, you still have two answers. So usually, a lot of times, your answer is going to be x equals plus or minus some kind of number. Okay, some kind of number there. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of examples here. All right, now examples, let's start at number 1. You see x squared equals 36. Well, the first thing that I've got to do here is see, okay, is there an x term? Well, there's not. There's no b term. And is x squared by itself? Well, in this case, in problem number 1, x squared is by itself. So what I can do now is I can take the square root of each side. Okay, so when I do that, what's going to happen is the x squared, the square term, and the square root essentially undo each other, or they cancel each other in this case. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to be left with an x on the left side equals, and because I took the square root of a number, I have to have plus or minus in this case. And then as you're looking at your calculator, what you're going to do is you're going to type in this into your calculator. So on your calculator, what you're going to hit is second, and then you're going to hit the x squared button. You'll see on the top of the x squared button the little square root there. And then you're going to type in the number 36 and then hit enter. When you do that, you end up with 6 as an answer. Now, it's not just 6, it's both positive and negative 6. Here's why. 6 times 6 is 36. But also negative 6 times negative 6 is also 36. So you will have 2 answers with every problem that you're looking at. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at the second one. Second example, again, is x squared by itself? Yes, it is. So I'm going to go ahead and take the square root of each side. Square root and the square cancel each other. And I end up with positive and negative square root of 20. Now you'll notice the square root of 20 is not a perfect square. So on your calculator, if you take the square root of 20, you end up with 4.472135. So I'm just going to say x equals positive and negative 4.472135. And what we're going to do is we are going to round these to the nearest tenth. So when I round these to the nearest tenth, I'm looking at this number right here. If that number is 5 or above, then I move this number up. If that number is 4 or below, it stays the same. In this case, it's 5 or above. So I have 4.5 as my answer. Okay, so example number 3. Now again, just a reminder, these 3 examples are not in your notes, so you're going to want to find a spot to write these down. I didn't mention that before. I probably should have done that. But these first 3 examples are not in your notes. The next example that I'll go through is in your notes. So this time, you'll notice there is this 5 out front of the x squared. Well, I can't have that there if I want to take the square root. So I've got to get rid of it. So in order for me to get rid of it, I'm going to have to divide by 5 on each side in this case. Do the opposite. It's multiplying by 5, so I'm going to divide by 5. These 5s are going to cancel. X squared is going to equal 35 divided by 5 is 7. Now the x squared term is by itself. So now I can take the square root. Square cancel. X is going to equal positive or negative square root of 7, which in this case, the square root of 7, again, positive and negative, 2.64575. Okay, again, look at that number. If that number is 5 or above, I move that 6 up. In this case, it's not 5 or above, so my answer is going to be positive or negative 2.6. Okay, so now let's take a look at an example that has a little bit more with it. Okay, so now as I look at this example, again, first goal is to get x squared by itself. I don't see a b term. There's no x in there in the problem. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get x squared by itself. So the first thing I have to do is subtract 10. So 4x squared is going to equal, in this case the 10's go away, 46 minus 10 is 36. And then I'm going to divide by 4. Again, got to get x squared by itself. 4's cancel. I now have x squared there. 36 divided by 4 is 9. Now that I have x squared by itself, I can take the square root of each side. Square root cancel. X is going to be equal to positive negative square root of 9. In this case, square root of 9. If I plug that in the calculator, or if you remember, 9 is a perfect square. So my answer is x equals positive and negative 3. Okay, one more example that I want to look at, and that is example number 4. And the reason I'm looking at number 4, okay, same kind of concept. I want to get x squared by itself. So I'm going to add 49 to each side. And now 4x squared is equal to 49. And again, I'm going to divide by 4. But you'll notice on this one, there's a reason I went through this one. 4's cancel there. Is that 4 does not go into 49 evenly. Okay? So I'm going to leave that. And you'll notice that these two are both perfect squares. A lot of times they'll do this to you where they leave perfect squares in both of these. So what I'm going to do, I can do this one of two ways. I can leave it as 49 over 4, or I can divide it out. Now, since we're making them decimals, I'm going to go ahead and divide that out. So this is 12.25. And then I'm going to take the square root. Square root cancel. X is equal to positive, negative. If I take the square root of 12.25, I end up with 3.5. Exactly. So my answer is x equals positive and negative 3.5. Okay, so now you should be able to complete your class kick examples for 4-5 solving by square roots.